University Diaries podcast.
That was such a crazy time. I can't believe it. This is going to be wild.
Hello and welcome back to the University Diaries episode 2, chapter 1. I hope you've been doing well, and I hope that you enjoyed the last episode that went out that was technically our introduction and also as a little teaser as to what's to come in this new podcast series that I've started. If you haven't listened to that already, give it a check out because it really sums up in about 6 minutes or so of what this really is going to be about and what I'm sort of aiming to take it in terms of direction. I had a lot of fun putting this episode together and taking myself back in time to the particular day that I'm going to share with you in a few moments. But before we get into it, I've just got a couple of quick disclaimers to make. I'm not going to be stating the university that I went to or what city it was in or any of those kind of details like that, because not only for the potential legal reasons, but also because I don't really think it's relevant. What I'm more interested in is telling the story and really sort of giving you a glimpse about what it was like for me to be in that moment, rather than getting bogged down with all of the details and stuff like that. I think it would be more interesting if you can just sort of picture in your mind what this was, what kind of environment it was. So without further ado, I think we should just jump straight into this episode really and dive in to chapter 1. So this is set around September of 2016. This was the day that I went to university and finally packed up all my stuff from the home and went off with my parents to the university halls of residence and got unpacked and got straight into the first night, if you will, of my university life. It was quite a good laugh in places. It was quite awkward in some, as you'll come to find out in a minute. And it was just great, really, because this was my first taste of freedom. And it was a total change of scene as well for me, because I came from quite a small, isolated little hamlet in England that doesn't really have much here. The best way to describe it is there's a pub and a church, and that's about it. And it's in the centre of this little valley. So going to a city was just like a totally different experience for me. You might as well have just dropped me off on Mars. I mean, obviously I've been to cities before, but to actually live in one was a whole different experience altogether. And I think this first episode really sums that up in how I was feeling and sort of what I was thinking and what I recorded in my diary. So let's go back there right now to September 2016, Chapter 1, Touchdown in Student Town. It was 2016, the year that the Starman died. A gorilla in a Cincinnati zoo captured our hearts in the same way that he captured a 3-year-old boy who plummeted into his enclosure. And David Cameron, the physical embodiment of 10 tons of sausage meat, hastily stuffed into a large opaque condom, finally trotted out of number 10 Downing Street and into the history books as the Prime Minister who had it off with a pig. And it was also the year that I went to university. It was a day in September that was, well, much like any other. However, it was the day that would mark my independence from the parents and the small hamlet I had grown up in. By late morning, we had loaded up the Skoda Roomster with all my clothes, possessions, and enough alcohol to go measure for measure with Paul Gascoigne. As my acoustic guitar slotted into the last available bit of free space left behind the front passenger seat, it signalled the moment to say goodbye to the old white house on the hill and roll on down the road to a new place nothing like I'd lived in before. I said goodbye to Sparky, our 13-year-old Jack Russell Patterdale Terrier Cross, who I was certainly going to miss very much. I ran my fingers through his soft, smooth coat and ruffled his ears. Then I folded myself like an origami swan into the small section of space left bare for the back passenger seat. The car started, the engine growled, and we trundled down the drive and headed for the road out of the valley. As my mum rode shotgun in the front and my dad drove, we looked like a migrant family that you see in the photos of Depression-era America, where they are all crammed into a small automobile and all the furniture is resting precariously on top. However, I was the only one who'd been moving on to a new life after being swindled by the promise of prosperity and great opportunities that are guaranteed to every young person of my generation by any person of an older age group. On the other hand, based on the large number of people that I knew that tried their hand at the university life and couldn't hack it, it seemed like my generation sometimes fails to understand that in order to reap those benefits, you also have to pursue them with a rabid hunger and desire. It's not like waiting for an apple to ripen and fall from the apple tree. You have to make it fall, and I was ready to chainsaw the whole tree down. It was only when we approached the motorway that it synced in for me. In a few short hours I'd be finally grabbing myself a taste of the university life, something I had fantasized over for the last couple of years. And it was at that moment that I felt a pretty severe case of bum shiver take hold of my gluteus maximus. This was a term of phrase I had coined as a young child to describe a tingly sensation I felt in my bum cheeks when in a situation that was a combination of being very exciting and also very nerve-wracking. Some people get butterflies, others get stage fright. I get bum shiver. Thankfully, that subsided when we arrived in the city and pulled into the university halls of residence. As we got out of the car and stretched our legs, we were greeted by the sound of thumping chart music being blasted through a PA system in the residence courtyard. Mums and dads were rushing behind eager sons and daughters as they grappled for luggage trolleys to carry everything but the kitchen sink. Activity could be seen in all the windows as the new fresher residents rushed to find their bedrooms in order to begin unpacking the contents for their new homes. Similar to the way an anal retentive swallow builds its nest. And all the while, the smell of burgers wafted through the thick, musty, warm air. It was official. I'd touched down in Student Town. Making my way to room 2 in flat 43 was by no means an easy task, not whilst carrying 2 large suitcases and a number of novelty items I had brought along to make my bedroom feel a little more like home. My room was at the top of 4 flights of stairs that was particularly narrow in sections. I was about crippled carrying a large box under my arm filled with about 30 books I seemed to think I would be reading in my spare time, and a large suitcase filled with all my clothes and shoes. I felt like sodding Quasimodo on his way up to the bell tower. Thankfully, a tall third-year student with broad shoulders and defined muscles showing through his black hoodie had seen me doubled over and came to my assistance, offering to take my suitcase. I was more than happy to oblige. As he carried my suitcase with a great ease up the flights of stairs, he asked me some of the very standard conversation questions that you tend to get asked by any student who is trying to make an effort to level with you in order to find a common ground of interest. Where you from? What you studying? You looking forward to freshers? You into sports? I answered whenever there was a gap to do so. The Lake District? Journalism? Yeah, man. Not really, but I used to play a bit of tennis. He said that I should think about joining the university's American football club. You should come over and try out, he said. You'd be great on the receiver line because you've got quite long arms. Finally, we reached the flat and dumped the stuff in my bedroom. As he was leaving, the tall and very helpful lad gave me a flyer for tryout week. Have a think about it, he said, and walked off. I shouted after him, Thanks. I took one look at the flyer, but then ended up deciding that I didn't quite fancy a brain hemorrhage at this moment in time, so promptly threw the flyer in the bin. After making a couple more trips to the car with Mum and Dad, and rushing back up the flights of stairs to decorate my room as quickly as possible and make sure there was enough space in the kitchen cupboards, freezers and fridges for my food and kitchen equipment, I was officially sorted. it was time to go and grab a burger and a cup of tea. Me, Mum and Dad sat in the courtyard with all the other parents and freshers. We sipped our tea and ate our burgers, and watched as the juggler in the courtyard juggled, the burger flipper on the grill flipped the burgers, and the parents who said goodbye to their kids cried and cried as they walked across the courtyard cobbles and out of the black wrought iron gates. It was an unusual mix of sights and sounds happening all at once, but entertaining nonetheless. "You gonna be alright then?" Mum said as she turned to face me on the wooden bench we sat on, signalling the point where her and Dad were thinking about leaving. "Yeah, I'll be alright," I said, and gave her and Dad a hug and a kiss. I walked them out to the car and waved as they pulled out of the car park and drove off into the sunset. It's usually at this point where the sharp bite of homesickness manifests for some students, particularly those that are unfortunate enough not to have a friendship group to cling to at this point. Thankfully for me, this wouldn't be an issue. On a previous visit to my university on a 1-week-long induction period, I had managed to run into a group of misfit individuals who had all become friends purely by chance through various different connections with each other. There was Alex, a computer gaming graphics designer, Lizzie, a fine artist and illustrator, Austin, he was doing something with computers, Daryl, a historian, and Matt, who was doing a course in film and TV. I got on with all of them like a house on fire. We had arranged that after we had got all of our stuff moved in, we would meet up in the evening at the Student Union bar for a few drinks and a catch-up. I couldn't wait to see them again. I passed the time in my room, grabbing myself a shower and kicking back on the bed for a bit. I felt I should have probably knocked on my flatmates' doors, introduced myself and asked a few of those formality questions that the football bro from earlier had done. But I couldn't be bothered, as I was too excited to see my friends I had already established groundwork with. As it got to evening time, the group chat started pinging off on my tablet. It was finally time to go and head over there. I took off out of the halls of residence and speed walked all the way to the bar. As I swung open the double doors and stepped in, I saw my 5 compadres sitting in the corner. It was as if we'd picked up right from where we left off. The conversation was flowing. The drinks flowed nearly as fast. If this was what the uni life was going to be like, then I was all for it. After a few drinks, my memory did get a little hazy, but I remember walking Alex, Liz, Austin and Daryl back to my flat to show them round the postage stamp size room that I was going to be living in. We were standing in my room when there was a very loud knock at the door. "Hello," said 2 girls on the other side of the door. They were obviously 2 of the people living in the flat that I hadn't bothered to meet earlier. They promptly invited themselves in and introduced themselves. "I'm Ellie," the blonde one said with a small rounded nose. "And I'm Neve," the taller one said with shoulder-length brown hair. Me and the others introduced ourselves, but I couldn't help but feel a little bit awkward at this point for not making the effort earlier on to meet them. There was a short pause as all 7 of us stood in the narrow walkway of my room, thinking of something to say to the other. "How come we didn't see you earlier on then?" they said in unison. Sorry, I didn't see you earlier on," I said. "I was heading out to meet these guys." Thankfully, the awkward tension was diffused when the girls invited us to join a party that was happening in the kitchen. Inside the kitchen was a thumping beat coming from a portable speaker and the heavy smell of alcohol and sweet mixer drinks, the telltale sign of a heavy drinking session in full swing. Also, there was the other 4 flatmates I would be living with for the rest of the year. There was Jack. He was studying outdoor education and had the room directly next to mine. He had long, thick brown hair of a young man that could have perhaps been raised in the wilderness. Across from him was Maddie. She was studying history and came across as very shy and timid, as she stayed very quiet and clasped a bottle of Copperberg strawberry and lime between both hands. Then there was Holly. She was studying childcare and she was significantly bigger than any of the others, in every sense of the word. She had a pint glass filled to the brim and presided over the drinks table that was laid out with a full spread of mixers, ciders, beers, wines and spirits. And finally, there was Michael, a tall guy with a skin fade haircut and a large bony nose. He was handling the aux cord and attempting to get the girls to dance by trying to flirt with them over the loud music. However, it didn't seem to be working out too well for him. Alex and the others stayed for a few moments before deciding to leave. I stayed and partied with the others for a little while and made an effort to get to know them by asking, "Where are you from? What are you studying? Are you looking forward to freshers? Are you into sports?" Eventually, I called it a night and headed to my room to crash out. As my head hit the pillow, I looked up at the ceiling and quietly reflected on the day. I made it, I said to myself. It's got to be all up from here. So there we go, that was chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. It was a little bit of all sorts, really. Like I said in the intro there, a lot of funny parts, a lot of cringy parts as well. You've got no idea how awkward I actually felt going into that kitchen and trying to sort of settle in as best I could, because I hadn't met any of them before, and the fact that I'd just rocked up there with a couple of other friends that I already had groundwork with, it perhaps didn't create the best impression, and along with also not making the effort to talk to them as soon as I arrived, that was definitely something that I'd come to regret later on. So I think if I'd done things differently, I would definitely have made more of an effort in that sort of early stage to get to know them and just find out a little bit more, because like I say, I don't think that perhaps created the best impression. But I was just so happy to get to university and get to see those friends that I already kind of knew to a certain extent, and just get into the full swing of things. And certainly after a few drinks there, it did ease things a little bit easier. So we're going to round off the episode there, I think. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back with another chapter from the University Diaries. If you want to find out more information about the show or any updates on when the next one's going to be coming out, etc, etc, I'm tending to upload them at weekends. That's what I'm going to try to do, is try and upload them at some point over the weekend, hopefully on Saturdays, but if I can't, then it will definitely be by Sunday. Make sure to like us on our social media. We're on Facebook. If you go to the University Diaries podcast with Luke Smithurst, you will find the official Facebook page for the podcast there. Alternatively, you can also go on Instagram and you type in Luke_University Diaries podcast. That is the official Instagram page for the show as well. You can find out on both of those where there's going to be updates, etc, etc. I did also say in the last episode that we were going to be having a YouTube channel as well. I'm still working on that, bear with me, but in the future, in the very near future, we will be able to have some recordings of the shows that will go on there as well. So if you don't miss it on any of the other platforms, or you don't really want to just listen to it, you want to sort of see me as well and put a face to the name. Side note, super disappointing looks-wise, by the way. Then you can also do that as well, and that will be an option too. So until the next episode, I'll check you guys on the flip side.